Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'm Daniel Rivkin from the Ford School. We're going to get underway shortly, but I've been asked to read a quick note about U of M policy. The University of Michigan strives to create an environment in which the freedom to express diverse viewpoints is valued and protected. This includes the freedom to oppose the views of others and also the right of the speakers to be heard. So please respect this important value of our academic community. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll get underway in just a couple minutes.
And you couldn't believe how poorly he was treated. But then again, wait a minute, but then again, here's the thing. Could you imagine coming up here in gray? I told him, I said, what the hell were you thinking when you came here? And he said, I came up to tailgate and somebody gave me tickets. I said, well, you should soap their windows because you got abused. Anyway. So I don't know about that policy.
So as you can already see, we are in store for a treat, a wonderful conversation today here at the University of Michigan and at the Ford School. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy. I am Celeste Watkins-Hayes, the Joan and Sanford Weill Dean of the Ford School. And I'm so pleased to welcome our two distinguished speakers. The Honorable Steve Bullock was the Democratic Governor of Montana from 2013 to 2020. Previously, he had been Montana's Attorney General for 4 years. And the Honorable John Kasich was Ohio's Republican Governor from 2011 to 2019, after 18 years in the House of Representatives. They both credit some of their successes with reaching across the aisle to get things done for their states. Both men remain prominent voices in their parties. Welcome to you both. We are so pleased to have you with us. So I am joined today by my colleague, friend, and partner in progress, Ford School Political Scientist Jenna Bednar, who is the faculty director of the University of Michigan's UMich Votes and Democratic Engagement Initiatives. Before we start, I've got a few words on the context and format for our event. First, today's discussion is part of a years-long effort at the Ford School to encourage conversations across differences. With the support of the Tufte Family Foundation, the Gottesman family, and others, we host a number of events each year that seek to model paths forward in our deeply divided country and world. This work is important to the Ford School, and it's important to the broader university as well. And I'm honored to be co-chairing, along with Jenna and LSA Dean Rosie Ceballo, a university-wide year of democracy, civic empowerment, and global engagement. Democracy depends on diverse perspectives, and we hope to inspire people to express their views, to listen to others as well, throughout this democracy theme year and beyond. And we want to thank the President's Office and the Provost's Office for their support in this year and beyond. Second, a quick note about today's format. Jenna and I will engage the governors, and after about 45 minutes, we'll open the discussion up for audience questions. Moderating the questions are Ford School BA student Isabella Acosta and MPP student Tiara Tresvan, and Professor John Hanson. For questions in the room, please use the QR code on the cards around the room. If you're watching online, the question link can be accessed on the event page or in the event description on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. So let's get started as we welcome this conversation with the governors. I have the first question. So the title of this conversation is Democracy and Discourse. When you were governors, you managed to get things done working across the aisle, or sometimes across different factions of your parties. On the national scene, it seems that politicians are rewarded for doing just the opposite. First, how did we get here?
Go ahead. You have a longer historical basis of how we got here than I think.
Well, I think that this has been coming over a long period of time. The parties picking at one another I remember when Tom Daschle was defeated, Bill Frist went out to South Dakota to defeat Daschle, and that was like a rule you didn't, a rule you don't follow. I mean, you don't break. It's like you respect the leader of the other party. But there were so many things that were happening. You remember when Bush won the election, Florida was in dispute. There were a lot of people say he didn't win that election. I remember when Robert Bork was up for Supreme Court. I mean, he dragged him, you know, right across the street, you know, and that created, all these different things came together. And then I think there's another element of this, and that is, I think the leadership didn't instruct the people that came in, particularly in Congress, to respect the other side. I can remember when I was leaving Congress in 2000, I was having a conversation with Pat Schroeder. She was a really smart woman, talented, and I was talking to her, and these Republicans were in the front row, and they go, well, what were you talking to her for? And I gave them a pretty good lecture. When I was budget chairman, which is one of the most hyperbolic committees, our guys used to say, well, why don't we just meet for an hour, shut them down, and get what we want? I said, we're not going to do that. And secondly, we're going to try to figure out how we're going to let them win some things. And I think that started to disappear. Everybody went to their base. And so now it's like everybody goes to their base, but now we're finding that even the bases are divided, people fighting one another inside the party. So it's kind of a mess. For me, I'm grateful that I had a Republican majority when I was governor, because I had a million things I had to do. And had I not only did I not only have the Republicans in the majority, but I had leaders in the party that understood what I wanted to do, which were very big things. You know, Ohio was a basket case when I came in. When I left, we were up jobs, and I mean, it was really great what happened there. But people were willing to take chances, and those leaders were critical. Later on, you know, then they started to get tired of me, I guess, probably the last year or year and a half or whatever it was, and it became more difficult. In Washington, when I was a congressman, remember, I was the chairman of the Budget Committee. We did the budget deal in 1997, which balanced the budget for the first time since we'd walked on the moon, and haven't done it since. And we negotiated every single item in the budget. At one point, I had the Democrats over a barrel because I'd gotten more tax cuts than they had originally agreed to. I said, oh, okay, that's good. The guy goes, well, if this is the deal, I'm going to get fired. I said, I'll give you some of the tax cuts back. So we had a spirit of getting things done, and then I left. And I think it fell apart in Washington essentially because I had left and wasn't there to. So, I mean, I don't even know what it's like now. I mean, I talk to people, I follow it, I cover things. It's everybody's sort of out for themselves, and that's a whole long conversation that Steve and I will talk about as to how politicians think these days. When I was there, at the end of the day in Congress, if there was something critical for our country, we got it done. And it started to deteriorate once I left as the governor. You know, that was a whole different situation, and it was actually a great time.
I think in some ways we got here, and that's where I guess my span's a little shorter. Like if you're an undergraduate, your political consciousness is probably from 2016 forward. Like this is not what things were like. I think most of the things that went wrong happened about when I was a senior in college. And I'll say three things. One of which was redistricting. Back in the late 80s, 135 congressional districts were competitive, meaning within 5 points could go either way. Now it's only 30. 30 out of 435. That means the incentive is if you're a Democrat, you need to win the primary and you need to run as far to the left. The Republicans as far to the right. There's no incentive system to compromise. Two, there was this little thing called the Fairness Doctrine. Fairness Doctrine basically said that public broadcast media, something that's going to go over the airwaves, it's not equal time, but you have to deal with controversial issues, and you actually have to show opposing sides. FCC repealed it. It had been around since, I think, the 40s. Actually, Congress tried to enact it. President Reagan vetoed it. at that time, this little broadcaster nobody knew in Sacramento named Rush Limbaugh decides, I'm moving to New York. The media environment has substantially changed, not only on that, but also on social media. Like, I was so excited thinking this is finally the chance for people talking to people about a candidate, not just a candidate talking to people. But what we have now is not only the algorithms, not only that, but between the media environment and cable news and others, you have trouble having a reasoned debate if you always have to be on or you always have to tweet. And the more extreme things are often actually what gets the best attention. Then the third piece of this, from my perspective, was a little case called Citizens United. Citizens United in 2010 that said corporations have the same rights of speech as any of us, and independent expenditures can't corrupt. And through that, at the same time, the premise of that case was that we live in this time of the internet and transparency, right? Everybody's going to know. They can judge who the speakers are. But the rise of unregulated, undisclosed money, it's about $5 million in 2008, it's over $1 billion in 2020, of where we don't even know who's writing those checks. And both from the candidates, the threat of independent expenditures, and outside expenditures for every $1 spent positive is $10 spent negative. Both the threat and the actuality, it's wrested control from the parties, from the candidates, and it's basically the outside interest. And none of those three things, the media, certainly redistricting, or outside spending, is there any incentives for civility or actually getting stuff done necessarily? That's actually disincentivized.
Mm-hmm. And then we definitely in this conversation will talk about what kinds of solutions and remedies you're thinking about for each of these things that you're describing. But I wonder if you can break down further at the state level. How is it different at the state level? Do you have more optimism at the state level, or do you think that what's happening at the federal level is really the canary in the coal mine for where we could be heading at the state level?
I have more optimism at the state level. Look, in part, 2016, I was the only Democrat in the country to win a statewide re-election in a state where Trump won. He won Montana by 20, I won by 4. 25% of my voters also voted for Donald Trump. My whole time that I was in office, my legislature was a little less than supermajorities. So I've had more vetoes than any governor in the history of our state. But actually, we figured out ways to get things done, be it expanding healthcare, be it in infrastructure, be it investments in education, of saying, like, let's actually localize this. What do most folks want, right? Most folks, if you go to a local community, you want the same thing, right? You want safe community, roof over your head, decent job, clean air, clean water, the belief you can do better for your kids and grandkids than yourself. So we found ways to work together. And I think the national polarization is getting more and more even into the state level and with our state legislatures. But the difference between like a governor and a U.S. senator, and this is a bias, I'll admit I was a governor, not a U.S. senator, is that a U.S. senator will get up and say, wow, didn't I change things? I made this great speech. Look at how many Twitter followings it had. Governors actually have to get stuff done. And you have to work with people that you don't agree with necessarily. And those folks in Montana, I wouldn't just see them in the legislature. I'd see them in my kids' basketball games. Like, you're closer to the ground and have to get things done. And I think that eases up the polarization a bit. But I will say, even since I left, I'm becoming more and more concerned that it really is now trickling through. I'd said in 2016, after I got reelected, I said, I wish people cared about politics as much as they care about professional sports, right? On any given Sunday, all of these stadiums are filled. You're watching at home. But I think what's happened now is people care about politics the same way that they care about professional sports. You're a Lions fan, I hate you, and I hate your aunt. And there's not much more thought beyond that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's getting worse in the legislative level. I mean, what's happening in Michigan, I imagine that there's factions, am I right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's the kind of the same deal. And, And it's a problem. Look, to me, it's simply a character issue. Why do you run? I mean, you should run for office because there's something you want to do. And my attitude when I went to Congress, I was 30 years old, and I was in the legislature before that at the age of 26. And the Democrats were in charge for 2 years. I never even thought about it that way. When I went to Congress, the Democrats were in charge. It never occurred to me they were in charge. I mean, they had the committee chairmanship, but I sort of like, this is what I'm going to do. And I didn't really think about, now, you know, as a Republican, I mean, I had some commitment to the party, but the party was never my master. It was only my vehicle. So it was like I was having a ball. What has been a mystery to me is that we have not had enough breakout leaders who say, enough of this. This is kind of silly. I'm going to vote against the leadership here. And somehow they've got it, I don't even know how they have the stranglehold. Maybe because the special interest groups are giving money to the leaders and then they pass it out to the members, and that somehow they do that. But, you know, to me, stand up, be for something. And so this polarization is happening because we're not seeing people say, I'm not going for that. I'm not voting for that stuff. I'm not going that way. I'm going to do things my way with respect. I mean, you got to have respect in the institution. But to me, that's what fixes this. And we'll see it begin to improve, I think, over time in Congress. We'll see it improve in the legislature. But right now, we're in a low tide right now. And as we see people begin to think about this and realize that their service, when they're away from their families, away from their kids, their spouse, their wife, their husband, whatever, why am I doing this if we're not getting anything done? And I came here because I wanted to change the world, and now the world isn't changing, and I'm still here. So at some point, people are going to begin to say, I've had enough of this. And I think you'll see some changes. When this election's over, by the way, there will be a discussion about what the Republican Party will look like. Now, if Trump wins, I don't know what that will be like, but if he loses, there's going to be a discussion either way. And I think the party needs to get back to the basics. I mean, this is the Gerald R. Ford school, and he was a Republican, and he had the certain values, and I think the party's going to have to fight that out. I think the Democrats, by the way, here's what's interesting about the Democrats. They had all these policies, okay? And I'm not here as a Republican, Democrat, or anything. I'm here just to give you my view. Kamala Harris has kind of walked away from all the policies she had 6 months ago. So where is the Democratic Party? Where are they on the energy issues? Where are they on taxation? I mean, they're all screwed up now. And I think both parties have to figure out, get back to their basics and figure out what they're for and chart a different course. I think we're in a little more dire shape than, I mean, you think about Trump and the crazy stuff he's saying. I just can't understand how anybody's voting for him, but this race is really close. But at the end, we have to define what we're for, and that might help some people get some courage and some guts to do something a little bit different. That's kind of where I see things. But without the character change, we're going nowhere.
Can I add one thing, Dean?
Yep.
Or maybe two things?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
First of all, after I just dumped on Washington and that it no longer works, let's think about bipartisan infrastructure law, CHIPS and Science Act, electoral count reform, postal reform, the protection of same-sex couples' marriage. Actually, so you actually had, and more actually, you had a bunch of bipartisan legislation pass this last time around, or in the last 4 years. So there is and remains some hope for that. And the other thing that, there was a guy who ran for president, Mo Udall, against Jimmy Carter in the 1976, right? And Udall didn't win, but he got up at the national convention and he goes, you know, when Democrats organize a firing squad, we usually do it in a circle. So we're real good at beating up on one another. And that's always been the case. But the sort of quote-unquote civil war going on in the Republican Party right now, that kind of assumes, from my perspective, equal sides. And what you see right now in many respects is the Trump or Make America Great Again faction so large that, to your point too, Governor, I'm not sure what happens after this cycle, how things get back to some sort of homeostasis.
You know, the other thing that I think has to be noted is that there are many people who feel very ripped off in this country, and they don't feel that either party is really speaking to them. I mean, if you were to ask a survey, well, how do you feel? Most people would say, I'm very disappointed in the choices I have. So one of the things that's happening that I think about as a Republican, okay, and again, it was my vehicle, not my master, we believe in a set of economic principles to create economic growth. I mean, I did it when I was budget chairman with lower capital gains taxes, and I did it as the governor, but at the same time I lowered taxes for those on the top. I also created a way for people on the bottom to be able to get something also. I think what we're not doing very well is listening to where people are. Now look, I'm in favor of immigration. I'm going to do a thing for one of the immigration folks in the, organizations here next week. I'm going to make a talk for them. But if you look at all the countries around the world right now, immigration has been a potent political issue that has moved most of these countries to the far right. What does that mean? Are we hearing what people are saying? What about housing? What about prescription drug costs? These are all issues out there that I think we're just not figuring out how to solve them. And you can't solve them all, Steve, as you and I know, by just throwing money at them, because our debt is so high that it risks our ability to be strong economically in the future. But we have to listen and try to create some solutions, and that's where the bipartisanship can really work. When the ACA, the Obamacare passed, John Hickenlooper, who's now a senator from Colorado, he doesn't return my calls as quickly, but when he was governor, he and I were buddies. We went down there to pitch some revisions to Obamacare that would still, do the bulk of it, but things that could have really improved it. Some of these things are very complicated. Think about Social Security. Think about Medicare. Think about Medicaid, the fastest growing item. Think about what we're doing with education. I mean, what does it cost to go to this school? Does everybody need to go here, or should we get a credential somewhere else? We can save money. We can hit the ground running. These are all crucial questions that have to be answered by my party, and I would like to be able to. One of my great buddies is Dick Gephardt. He and I served in the Congress together. It's how do we get together to answer what that public is saying? Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, really important. And by the way, in case I would forget, I came here running for president. If Rubio hadn't stayed in the race, I would have won Michigan. Could have changed a lot, because I then went to Ohio and won Ohio, and then went east where I was doing better. The people of this state were so great to me. I will never forget how great Michigan was to me. So there's a special place in my heart. I had to get that advertisement in, okay?
Well, we're super glad to hear that you love the people of the state of Michigan. And it is actually to the people, not just of the state of Michigan, where I want to take us next. Because we've been talking a lot about elite polarization within Congress and between the parties. But let's also think about the public. And you've been touching on it a lot when you're talking about public sentiments about various areas of public policy. And I want to get back to something you just raised about immigration, right? So the recent attention on the Haitian immigrant population in Springfield, Ohio, drew a lot of national attention, and certainly to the extent that Ohio's population is diversifying, right? But including through immigration. And Governor DeWine wrote a really, I thought, beautiful op-ed. I don't know if anybody read it, in the New York Times, in support of the Haitian immigrants, who are very, as he pointed out, very important members of the labor force in an energetic economy. But that whole affair cast a spotlight on just how hard it is to appreciate difference. And so what possibility or what promise do you see
in moving forward in amongst our public in coming to understand and embrace the importance of difference and working collaboratively across difference to build our democratic and economic future.
Until we all begin to realize that every human being has been made in the image of God, we're missing it. If we don't realize that you're special and you were made for a purpose and you were made for a purpose, then, then I don't respect you. I don't honor you as a human being. I think there's a spiritual element of this. I talked about this earlier with a group of students. I have a book that's coming out in April. It's a collection of stories of people who the power of faith in mosques and synagogues and churches, that these folks show that the faith institutions can be a bulwark in our country and can solve some of the biggest problems that we have. And they don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, they don't care. They're out to change the world. They're out to feed people. They're out to provide a not sanctuary, but they're there to make sure that people feel as though they can be accepted. These are people who deal with foster programs, with mental health, with drugs, everything. Until we begin to look at one another and say, that person was made special by God, then I think it's just treating people like widgets. That's what we've been increasingly doing. And I think we can get back to that. It would take immigration. Of course, we need it, but it has to be controlled. And what was really bizarre, Steve, is you got one of the candidates saying, I know that these stories are wrong, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. I mean, you would have been run out. You'd be living in South Dakota. I would be living in Michigan, maybe, if you take me up here. But it's unbelievable. And what last thing? What's the fear that people have? We have to hear what their fear is. Is it they're going to lose jobs? Is it that, they're going to lose their neighborhood? I mean, listen to what they're saying, and then try to develop a policy or a program to respond to them. You can't just shut them down. They're not going to go away. Listen to them.
Yeah, you can look at some basic things like 450 immigration judges for 850,000 cases, which Congress hasn't fixed, which means that if you come to the border without documentation, you're probably not going to get a hearing for 6 or 7 years. Like, that ought to be one where we ought to be able to fix that, to make sure that those that are coming in our country either are coming through ways that Congress has authorized, it makes sense. But to this, or even think about just last week, the South is getting devastated by hurricanes. And one of the candidates said, all that FEMA money ain't going actually to protect people. It's being spent on people that don't even belong in our country. And the administration's doing nothing to help. It was Republican governors that said, guess what? We're working together. A guy named Elon Musk, he only has 200 million followers. He actually then parroted the exact same thing about where all this FEMA money's going. So I can't just put it on, why aren't the people doing better? There's something called misinformation, and we're all guilty of it, right? That, I hear something, I repeat it, then somebody says, Bullock, you're wrong. I'm like, shoot, I'm wrong. And then there's something called disinformation, which is intentionally saying something that's false to try to create an outcome. And that outcome could be votes, it could be fear, it could be finally otherism, like if your life hasn't gotten better and somebody says it's because somebody that looks different than you has made it not better. It might be nihilism, as Professor Lampe said last night, of just like, look, throw my hands up and I don't believe anything anymore. I agree with the governor. We have to find the solutions. But then we also have a collective obligation when it's disinformation, not misinformation, to call it out and say, irrespective of if it's in your party's interest, but just to say, no, this isn't true. And this can be damaging to, as Governor DeWine wrote that op-ed, to find people in Springfield, Ohio.
Exactly. Actually, this is probably a good moment, Celeste, I think, for that question you have about technology.
Yeah, so with respect to technology, many of our students are interested in this relationship between technology, information, and policy. What are each of your thoughts on the impact of technology on democracy? With information rapidly coming at us from so many different sources, the emergence of AI as a potential helper and a threat, perhaps even an accelerator of what you're talking about, Governor Bullock, and the social media environment playing such a prominent role in the way that we can connect. You've talked about what effect this has had on democracy. What are some strategies that we need to be thinking about to respond to this? Because it feels like emptying out the ocean with a teaspoon. How do we begin to respond to the information environment and the role that technology plays?
You to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of different things. I suppose one is, oddly enough, litigation. Mm-hmm. You look at all of a sudden when Dominion sues Fox, and oops, we might have to tell the truth, or Giuliani getting a $348 million, or Alex Jones of InfoWars, where you're saying the Sandy Hook parents are fake. Well, it took Sandy Hook parents to actually sue to get him to say, oops, and now he's going to be liquidated. Part of it is consumer pressures, I think, with technology. Like you look at Verizon finally dropped One America News after Dish TV did because enough folks had said, you can't, like, you're spreading lies, mm-hmm. the disinformation, not the misinformation. I think directly with the social media platforms, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But I'm not, like, look, they shouldn't be in charge of canceling folks. But Senator Kelly just this past weekend, right, said that from Arizona, from the FBI, the DNI, and NSC, that what he had been briefed on is 20 to 30% of all social media content and reposts in the political areas are coming from Iran, Russia, and China. That's a big threat. There's this called the Communications and Decency Act. There's Section 230, which 26 words basically created the internet. And it also gives complete, absolves from any liability for falsehoods, social media platforms. I don't know that you repeal that, but we have to have a discussion about, because this is now the electronic town square that's operated by algorithms, which it's profit-making motive, but what responsibility do they have if that's where so much of the discourse is actually going to be coming from now?
Well, I've been involved with what's called the Kids Online Safety Act. Okay, we're trying to bring some regulation to the big players in this, and it passed the Senate. I think it was 92-3 or something. It's not even getting a hearing in the House.
Wow.
I mean, at some point there has to be, when you talk about AI, there's going to have to be some regulation, some guardrails. When it comes to this, these big companies are going to have to be held accountable. But the reason why it's not happening is they have great political influence. Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we're back to the same issue. Are you willing to make profit while we see kids who are in depression, have serious, very serious behavioral problems? I mean, is that important to you, that you need to make more money? What about the public good? What I think you can do, by the way, is I don't care what the issue is. Steve, I think you probably would agree with this. It doesn't matter what the issue is. If you take people who surround the issue, if you put them in a room, you don't let them walk in the room, you know, heavy in terms of what they represent, but to walk in there with an open mind, recognizing there's a problem, It's amazing what you can fix. Thinking Congress is going to fix AI, what are you kidding? That's not going to happen. But if they got the best and brightest together and people understood the danger, look what's happening in the AI world right now with Sam Altman and even Elon Musk and the people quitting who were engaged in this because they thought things had gotten too far along without proper safeguards. If you can put these people in a room and our leaders can put them in a room, you can come out with some solutions that would be unique and credible. And I don't think enough of that is being done. But when I sound like a broken record, it's we think politics is broken. Really? How's college sports doing? Great, isn't it? Really just great, isn't it? Yeah. We spent $22 million to buy our football team. It's just a wonderful thing to watch all of our college where, used to be, dedicated to the University of Michigan or to Ohio State. Now it's like, okay, how much do we pay? This kid from Ohio State went to Texas. He's got paid $2 million to go. I mean, what, are you kidding me? How's that going? How is it going with these big companies that are putting things, profit ahead of everything else? What about the private equity groups who are buying all these medical practices? Are you familiar with this? They buy the medical practices. You were seeing 30 patients. Now you got to see 50 patients, and then they flip their investment. Where's the conscience? I mean, where is it? And that's what we have to get back to. And again, when I say there's an element of a spiritual side, it doesn't have to be my religion. We're a very diverse country. But all of the religions basically have the same sort of foundation. Love God, love your neighbor. And it's not all about you. So if we can begin to, where does that come from? It comes from you. And you, it doesn't come from somebody down in Washington or somebody that's at the Capitol here. It has to come from us. I believe that a society rises or falls on the basis of the quality of the shepherds that lead the flock. You have good shepherds, you got a healthy flock. You got bad shepherds, what happens? The flock scatters. It's not complicated, folks. And we all have to play a role in being a good shepherd to somebody who's in our family, who's in our work environment, who are our friends. Knock off the anger out there, the finger pointing, the hatred. Knock it off. It gets us nowhere. So starts with us. Steve is a great leader. He's going to be a big leader in the Democratic Party for a long time to come. We have to count on people like him to make a real difference. And I think we can turn this stuff. I mean, I know we can turn this stuff. I just saw the Reagan movie, which my wife wanted me to go to, and it took me back to the days, I knew Ronald Reagan. Immigration, 1986.
Yeah.
We passed a comprehensive immigration bill that actually had forgiveness in it. Passed overwhelmingly. That was 86. That wasn't 1786. That was 1986, okay? We can get back there. But the quality of our shepherds has to rise. Hold everybody accountable, though, and nobody's looking for sainthood. We're just looking for something that's a little bit better. Does this make sense to you?
It totally does.
Okay, well, I don't know if it does or not because, we got these evangelicals out there. I think, I don't even understand what the hell they're thinking, that Donald Trump's the savior. I mean, it's weird. But I'm talking about the basic concept of faith. It matters in our society, in my opinion. So,
I want to pick up on this in particular in the sense of what role leadership can play in changing people's perceptions of what's possible. And hello to all of my students from the state gov class. I want to take it back to the states. Because right now I just don't see this kind of leadership coming. Right now I don't see it in Congress. But could you talk a little bit about the promise that you see in the states, perhaps with AI regulation? I know California's been a real leader in regulation, but also its convening power, right? So much
Didn't he
so.
just veto the AI bill?
Well, but there
just a little detail.
Okay, that is true.
But that's okay.
But there are other things that they're
Yeah.
trying to do, and we do see, so if you could talk a little bit about the promise that you see at the state level in serving as a guide, as a leader that could spread to other states and eventually maybe even up to Congress. It could be in AI, it could be in some of these other
Well,
policy.
okay, I don't want to, I'm rambling on. I got to let Steve have his time. Let me try to be short here. First of all, I expanded Medicaid. Then I got involved in North Carolina with Roy Cooper, Democrat, good guy. I dealt with the leaders in the North Carolina legislature on telephone calls. They passed Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. I got a call the other day if I would call the governor of Alabama because she's starting to think about doing some sort of expansion there. Yeah, I mean, that's good stuff, where, you know, we could get that done, and they're coming up with their own different ways in which to get it done, particularly when the politicians don't have to vote and they can get it anyway. But, I mean, that's good stuff. But I see in my own legislature, I don't follow it that closely, but they're at loggerheads. I mean, the Republicans are at loggerheads with one another. There's just, stuff's too personal and everything, and I saw it coming at the end of my term. But do I think you can get them together over time, talk sense to them, and bring them around? Steve, you and I both know we can, right? You did it.
Yeah. And I do have more optimism at the state level, even though I think polarization, everything's creeping down. Like, I think of, you know, we say, like, Brandeis, the states are the laboratories of democracy, but we can also be what kind of the beacons that can elevate up. One example, and it wasn't even our legislature, FCC repealed net neutrality. And I did this little executive order that said, if you're going to sell services to the state of Montana, you can't block or throttle, things like that. I know Montana's not the market maker for the nation, so I made a template that any other state could take on.
Campaign finance.
Yeah, small states like New York and New Jersey then signed the same thing. Republican states, Vermont, Phil Scott did. I look at where, in some respects, over my last 4 years now, so I had first 4 years, 12 to 16, last 4 years, 16 to 20, where on, sure, DC wanted to pull out of the Paris Accords, but individual states, like I put together a plan of not just words, how would we actually get to meeting those climate goals in a state like Montana? I think that we can continue campaign finance. At one point, some of it's been repealed, but even with that 2/3 Republican legislature, almost 2/3, we had some of the most progressive campaign finance laws in the country. Now, it only applied to our state races because we couldn't regulate the federal. So you can still see activity and actions at the state level, and as your buddy John Hickenlooper used to always say too, that the best governor, what does he or she do? He steals from other governors, right? So once something happens, taking that to your state, and that's how you start building things along.
You know, there's one other thing that I did that's interesting. It was I privatized economic development in Ohio. Because I didn't think the bureaucrats could move at the speed of business. And so through a complicated deal where we did bonding on New York, and we created this thing called Jobs Ohio, which has been, I think, the most successful economic program in the country. I'm now in West Virginia, wow, which is one of the poorest states, and I'm down there talking to them about how they can create a jobs West Virginia. So there are things we can do at the state level as leaders that can be shared with other states. But yeah, I mean,
and it can be in a way that really is nonpartisan or bipartisan. Like one of my, I never got it done, right? But one of my things I really wanted to do is completely voluntary pre-K, right? Because we know 90% of a child's brains develop before they even enter kindergarten. If you're not kindergarten ready, half as likely to graduate from our, be at reading level at third grade. You're not reading level at third grade, half as likely to graduate. So I pushed far ahead, I'm moving, and my legislature's like, ooh, you want to basically start, you want to have control of these little babies when they're 2. So I took my legislative leaders to Alabama, because Alabama had a great pre-K program. Oh. And the state legislators were like, oh, you're only almost 2/3 Republican? I'm sorry you have to deal with all those Democrats. But I could use the example of Alabama to say look, this isn't partisan, taking care of kids, trying to make sure that they have the opportunity. This isn't some fuzzy thinking liberal, because Alabama ain't fuzzy thinking liberals. We didn't get it all the way through. In part, it was, at the end, it was my party more than anything else. But that's another area where when we see things like Governor Kasich's jobs program or other things that can work, we can actually work in other states. That when Medicaid expansion was trying to get through, whether because Governor Kasich visited and ended up getting into a discussion with some of those legislators. When I was first trying to get Medicaid expansion through, I brought Arkansas legislators up, Republican ones, to my state to try to say, this is bigger than any partisanship, right? And I think there is still hope in those areas.
What about in the area of elections? And this model of states as laboratories is really interesting. And we know that voting, so critical. We have an election coming. We're living at a time of conversations about election integrity. It's become a divisive issue in terms of people having trust in elections. How do you think about the role of the states and the role of governors in improving public confidence in elections?
Elections are run locally. I mean, it's local, it's not state.
Yeah, but some governors have been called.
I mean, you have to, as a governor, you just be a leader. Tell people, that this is fine, whatever it takes on that. I mean, but I don't want the state taking over the elections. I'd rather the local people have the elections, which they do right now. And of course, it's become increasingly difficult to be a poll watcher because then, you get harassed and all that. I mean, it's like all these things, right? It's just like one falls on another one. And that's a challenge. Public health issues become so polarized. I mean, what are you kidding me? I mean, we can't figure out how to, we have another pandemic. What are we going to do if we can't come together on some basic things about public health? So, but back to the elections, I mean, it's local, and we as leaders should support it, but we can't do everything. And have fair election laws. We have early voting in Ohio, and it's gone pretty well there. I mean, I don't think we've really had any problems in our state. That's kind of my sense of it.
Yeah, I think, look, we visited your election site here, and this great deputy clerk.
See how gorgeous it is.
It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I asked the deputy clerk who runs it, so how's it being a deputy clerk of elections now? And, she's a better politician than I could ever. She goes, there can be some challenges. There ought to be, look, there's got to be some baselines. Right, we've got to make sure that we have free and fair elections. I think everybody could agree on that. I'm troubled when 171 members of Congress from 37 states still deny the results of the 2020 election. I'm troubled when even today they say, well, let's look forward, but can we acknowledge, like J.D. Vance, as an example, had said he wouldn't talk about what happened in 2020. I'm troubled in as much as I've been deeply disappointed in elections at times, and we always have to try to improve the system. But you don't just deny the results. And where I fear this leads is, look, if you guys, 18 to 30, voted in every election, you would decide every election. And there's at least one day every 2 years that you're more powerful than any governor or corporation or special interest, and that's on election day. And if we erode the integrity of elections or people's trust in elections to the point that people just say, I ain't voting, well, then we're going to be in a heck of a lot worse position even than we are today.
I have a tiny follow-up question, and then we probably want to...
There's no such thing as tiny with two former governors. We talk a lot. Go on, though.
I mean, just as we're thinking about electoral reform, and, here I teach state government, and I actually have this really preposterous claim that federalism supports democracy. But that aside, there's a lot of question about the Electoral College. And as an alternative, people are proposing the national popular vote. Let's just take the states out of it. And this question is actually for the governor from Montana, because your state would be deeply affected by this. So what do you think about a proposal like that?
So a couple different things, I guess. One of which is like, people are like, we need a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College. We've been trying for a century to get the Equal Rights Act through. How's that worked out for us? You know, so I'm not that confident that
No, and like that's part of my point on that is that that's a constitutional amendment's probably not going to happen. There's talk about state compacts and things like that, where there's even a whole lot of people.
Did Montana sign?
Not when I was governor.
because there's also this piece of when it comes, and maybe this is my sort of small state views, but as opposed to saying, let's give California that much more weight or things like that, and I'm saying this as a Democrat, we should be saying, what are we doing to make sure that we can compete everywhere? And I think both the system of federalism, I'm not sure, I like the idea of going to just the national popular vote, because it diminishes certainly more rural states. If we're not already irrelevant, we would be totally irrelevant at that point. And I also, just practically, unless the compacts state by state happen, like I just wish that we wouldn't say, let's amend the Constitution, because I'd rather get the Equal Rights Act through before that.
Not only am I not for getting rid of the Electoral College, I'm not for getting rid of the filibuster either. That's another boneheaded idea in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. Because you talk about doing away with all the requirements or the forces that force you to get together with others to resolve things. I mean, I think it's possible you could look at the filibuster in a slightly different way, but to get rid of it, you want to put, let me ask you this, you want Trump working without a filibuster? How'd that feel? Or for those who are Republicans, you want Harris to, but she's already talking about getting rid of the filibuster. I'm not. In terms of getting rid of the Electoral College, see, what happens is when you don't win, then you want to change the rules. Well, why don't we have more Supreme Court justices? Or why don't we put term limits in? Why? Because you don't control the court anymore? See, I mean, it's not, that's just all, you know, kind of whining in my opinion. And so, I mean, I want Montana to matter. Yeah. Are you kidding? I'm not going to get rid of Montana or Kansas or any of those other places. And I'm for definitely keeping Michigan in play. So there you go.
Why don't we go to some questions from the audience?
I just want to thank you all for having this conversation with us today. And I do want to bring us back to the home. One of our first questions is, a part of overcoming differences starts with conversations with friends and family. What are a few guiding principles for navigating contentious topics at home?
A few guiding principles as to what you do when you're in Thanksgiving and you're having a discussion. Think that your mother and father are usually right. That would be a good, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, okay? I mean, just be restrained. Again, respect somebody else's point of view, and sometimes just let it go. Did you ever go fishing? I don't fish very well, but I know that when the fish is really big, you let it run out. Sometimes let the conversation run out. People wear themselves down a little bit. But, you know, respect them again. Listen to what they have to say. They actually, this is really, I don't know if we would ever hear this again. You know, I never thought about that. When was the last time we heard that? Or, you know what, I might have been right. I mean, I might have been wrong, Steve. Maybe you were right. Or maybe I ought to find out more information. I bet you get along great with your family and your friends. So just everybody's got to just chill a little bit. Just chill out a little bit, right? I don't know if that's helpful. But it's interesting how you were sitting right next to that microphone and got the first question.
When I got elected, my kids were 6, 8, and 10. Youngest in 40 years. And I'll never forget, we move into the governor's residence. My son kicks a soccer ball. It bounces off a painting. You know, the residence manager says that painting's worth $250,000. I'm like, take down all the damn paintings then, right? Because we got to live here. But in my first State of the State, I talked about how you're going to hear different things from the governor's residence and the governor's mansion. And that's the sound of kids. And I said, kids learn from our words and our deeds. We need to start acting like our kids are watching, because they are.
Yeah, there you go.
I think in our family conversations even, like, look, if we could think about kids are watching, but asking questions more than giving positions, like, it's interesting that you think that way. Why? And it may not change your mind. You may be able to, when they say, yeah, well, I saw this on Rumble and blah, 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 you might be able to unpack that a little bit more. And I think, yeah, turn it down when we can, not turn it up. Like, we share so much in common collectively too as a country. You know, it is so difficult that the politics of the day can divide not only the nation, but our families. But to enter it with the open heart and asking why, not telling why you're wrong, I think can diffuse some of this.
You know, an interesting story. We didn't live in the governor's residence. We stayed in our home. So the highway patrol would park in our driveway 24/7. And so this kid was coming over. My daughters now are 24, so at the time, they were 10 when I was elected. And the funny thing is, oh, wait a minute, is that right, Trevor? Yeah, so when they were like 15 or whatever, this one kid was coming over to ask my daughter to go to some dance or something, and the trooper got out of his car. He's like 6'10", right? He's got this uniform on. He says, what do you want here? He says, I'm here to ask Emma to go out to go to the dance. She says to him, this kid, she doesn't want to go with you, go away. And he did. Never knew what happened. It might have been her husband for all we know.
Oh, no.
Similar story, my oldest is 22. I meet her first boyfriend at a science fair, and I'm like, nice to meet you. And I'm like, you have nothing to worry about me. And the guy with me showed his gun and goes, like that too. He was always really nice. Caroline probably didn't appreciate it, but.
Okay, so following that same line of thought, reasonable civil discourse is undoubtedly important, but it possesses the ability to legitimize bad faith or extremely low information discourse. Are all conversations worth having? If so, how should one engage with an actor who refuses to agree on the evidence?
Oh.
I didn't get the question.
If they won't listen to evidence.
The evidence.
Oh.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah.
Move on. I mean, what, you know, you're not going to, if they're not going to listen, then just move on to the next person. But trying to engage them or convince them or yell at them is not going to change anything. I hate to tell you that, but maybe they'll wake up later.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, back to the first question, maybe ask questions, but you're not going to, at some point, but you can also find, like, I have some people in my life that, boy, we see the world differently. But we like talking about fishing. We still have some community bonds, even if we're never going to see the same worldview on democracy or other things.
Oh, you're reading what their questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. All right, can you talk into that microphone, because we can barely hear you guys.
Yes.
Pretend you're, you know, at an Ohio State game. Go ahead.
Can you tell us about a time when you changed your mind about something?
I changed my mind about one of the programs. I'm trying to remember what the heck the name of it was. It was the one where people could go and volunteer in community services. But they were getting paid. And I was like, wait a minute, they're getting paid, but they're called volunteers. But I checked the program out, I thought it was right, and I changed my mind. So a lot of things I learned. You know, Steve and I were talking about this earlier. Being in Congress, you know, you're so far removed. You go out, you go to all these events and everything, but you're just actually so far removed from the practical problems that people have. But when you're a governor, boy, when those things come at you, you got to deal with them. I mean, that's just the way it has to be, and you have to think about it. I mean, one of the things I did is we were having trouble in the state passing this ABA therapy for people who have kids who are autistic. And it was being held up and held up and held up and held up, and I met these women, and one of them, I call her the Joan of Arc. I just had enough of it, so I just I just said, we're going to cover them all. We're just going to do it. I didn't really know that much about it, but when I heard the stories, done, finished. People said, well, what's going to happen to small business? I said, suck it up a little bit. We're going to do this. This has to be done. So that's not a change of my mind, but because the public informed me about something and I could hear them, I decided to really act.
I think in some respects, and this isn't answering your question, we're good at that too. Governors live in an anecdotal world, meaning that you don't have time to research everything. You count on your staff. But the experiences of someone telling you that this is what ought to be done, because that's what you bring home, those experiences that you have. Like, my kids used to hate going to Target because someone then would feel empowered to tell me what we ought to be doing, but it also gave them voice. So I would like to think that on a regular basis, oddly enough, I probably changed my mind. Or at least I was educated in ways that I wouldn't have if I didn't have experiences like that.
What is the most uncomfortable truth you had to accept in your political career? How has facing that truth shaped the way you lead today?
Well, the most uncomfortable truth for me was that I didn't get elected president. I mean,
Me too, I only ran for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You know, in fact, we were talking about this on the way. Trevor and I traveled with me here from Columbus. I think it was like, I mean, a year and a half, 2 years of just one different town, another state, flying in a tiny little plane. I mean, I did 115 or 20 town hall meetings in New Hampshire. I mean, it was, now, I loved it all. I loved it. I was supposed to come here during the campaign, but I got snowed out, and I was grateful. It gave me a day off. I couldn't come to Ann Arbor. But it was really, really hard, and for a long time, I thought I could win. And I finally dropped out when I knew that I couldn't get enough delegates lined up to block him at the convention. At the end, I was hanging in there because I thought maybe we could get to a convention and have a different result once I knew that I couldn't win. And I remember, you know, distinctly when the day I decided to leave the race. And I went to my kids' school. My daughters were there. And it was very hard. I mean, when I first announced it, I went behind a building and had a good cry. It was really running for president legitimately for a long period of time and raising the money and doing all the things you have to do. It takes everything you have. But I wouldn't trade it for anything because I learned so much, and it was really incredible. And I'm glad that I did it. But it was hard to say, I'm not going to get there. And part of the reason why I didn't win, Steve, because I'm a person, if you want to give me money, fine. But you're not getting a single thing for it, okay? Nothing. And sometimes I'd argue with you. So, you know, a lot of people who are big givers, they want you to, oh yeah, you're right. I just never did that. Another $50 million, which is not a lot of money in the total scheme of presidential politics, I think I would have had a good shot at winning. But I didn't, so that's the end of it.
A more policy-specific question about abortion. How can we have a productive conversation across differences that may lead to policy steps that could get widespread support?
The question was, how can we have a productive discussion of, I mean,
Notice I shifted right over to here. No, look, I mean, here's where the country is now. People don't want extremes. They don't want extremes at the end, and they don't want extremes in the beginning. That's where this is where it's going to be figured out. And I think we're getting there, Steve. I actually think that there is movement. on both sides to realize there's got to be restrictions, but let's not do it too early, and let's not do anything. Let's do some things early and lose some things late. The extremes don't work on that issue, in my sense.
Yeah. I hope that's right. I think in some respects, you know, the dog caught the car when Roe was overturned. And all of a sudden, the discussion about a woman having dominion over her own body has substantially changed. I think we've seen even in places like Kansas, right? Not, again, the most fuzzy thinking liberal place where people speak up. So I take it at even restoring where we were with the protections of Roe, I hope that's where we go. How do you have some of those conversations? It's difficult. I remember speaking to a philosophy professor who said, I would never even sit at the table with this individual who was a anti-choice governor because he wouldn't respect me. He has zero respect for me. And that was actually an anti-choice governor that was a Democrat. And I said, well, think about it, like, this gentleman actually got Medicaid expansion through, did so many things that can make a difference in health and indeed maternal health. And there are some issues that I think can be so deeply embedded in people that we may never get, so we see the same on it, but also, again, can we try to understand them? It's my best answer for that.
In the wake of events like Hurricane Helene, how do you see divisiveness or unity within our country and politics? What do you think is going to have to be the tipping point for our country to come together again, even in the face of disaster?
So I think one of them in Polarization, I think I said this earlier, I didn't follow her career that closely, but there was nothing I agreed with Liz Cheney on. And now if she needed a kidney, I'd probably show up at the hospital and give her one of mine. Like, I hope that we get to, in some of these, and maybe the realignment is, do you believe in the norms that have been underlined this 250-year experiment called representative democracy, or don't you? And if that's where we start to get to that, and I'll also say this 250-year experiment called representative democracy that hasn't been perfect for a whole hell of a lot of people for a long time, but it's still hopefully something that's, you know, the arc is bending in the right direction. Natural disasters were never political, right? And there was, if my neighbors, irrespective of their politics, needed my National Guard, if the governor asked, I would send them. I think part of what's happened in the same time that we're 30 days out from an election, goes back to what I was talking about of, this isn't misinformation, this is disinformation to try to impact elections. What I hope is ultimately we get to the point, and you know, God bless those governors that stood up and said, no, we're actually working well with the federal government. Probably didn't help Chris Christie when he showed up with Barack Obama after Hurricane Sandy. But there ought to be some things that are a little bit bigger than the politics of the day, and part of that's protecting our people and our communities.
I think I already answered it 10 times, so.
How do we bridge political divide on the issue of climate change? And do you have any personal stories for how you communicate the issue to people who don't have the same perspective as you?
Well, I mean, I think was one of the first, I mean, what are we kidding? Of course we know what's happening. The CO2 buildup acts as a blanket, and everything underneath it is more volatile and violent. Now, the problem we have is we got China and India, who are the biggest abusers. And, you know, we also aren't going to do something that's going to break our economy. And it's interesting because now Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are on the same page on this, interestingly enough. They're not talking about the new Green Deal and all these other, that's not doing it. Now they're saying, what are the practical things that we can do? But we have a big issue here with India and China that probably has to be handled with the Western nations, probably through some sort of a trade agreement, some kind of a trade exchange. I'm not quite sure about it, but we've got to continue to improve. But we have big offenders. In China's like opening up new coal plants every single day. In Ohio, we dramatically reduced our problems over there because we went to natural gas. I mean, we had like a 55% cut in emissions. So there's ways to do it. And I'll tell you, I drive a Tesla. I wish there'd be some charging stations. I mean, I was told there were going to be them everywhere, but I can't find them. I mean, but things like that, solar, wind, you know, and nuclear power. I mean, nuclear's on its way back, and I think there's a possibility that you're going to see a new movement towards nuclear power, and that doesn't come from a Republican. I see it even with my Democrat friends, and there's way in the back somebody waving their hand. Did they not fill out the? Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I got it. No question. I mean, these are not easy things, but technology is moving quickly, and we have to have those countries agree to participate. China doesn't need to be building all these extra coal plants right now. They're no longer like a third world country, right? They're not like an emerging power. What are you kidding? They're like our great competition. And on India, I mean, we have to figure out a way in which we can reduce that pollution, because if we do not reduce CO2, what the heck's going to happen to our world? And we have an obligation to do it, to be good stewards of our environment. Doesn't mean we have to worship the environment. It means we have to be good stewards of it. And I think we can do that. I do.
I would say in some ways, to bridge the divides, like James Baker, who was chief of staff for the first Bush, said, we're going to address the greenhouse effect with the White House effect. Meaning here was a whole long time ago, a Republican president saying, climate's changing. We got to do something about it. Then we went through this long period, I put that in part on the corrupting influence of money, where a whole lot of people couldn't even talk about climate change. I think one of the ways that we help bridge the divide is to start talking about the climate opportunity. Meaning if what you want to say is that this is the biggest crisis our country, and I'm not even going to go internationally, our crisis faces. If you don't know how you're going to make it at the end of the month, you don't care about the end of the world. So this can also be an opportunity to create good jobs, not leave communities behind, and save our planet. Make it in the terms of opportunity if you're talking to somebody, not just the I can't even spell existential. Why do we say words like that as opposed to here is a great opportunity that we need to address, we need to come together and address?
There's a great Jim Baker story. I don't know if many of you remember him. He was the chief of staff he was also chief of staff to Reagan. I was with Jim Baker. He has a school down like Gerald Ford does. He has a school at Rice, at Jim Baker, at a public policy school. I was having breakfast with him. I spoke there. And some woman comes over and sees him, and she's all, well, Mr. Secretary, I love you, I love you. She walks away. He says, you know, I used to get recognized like that all the time, everywhere I went. He said, in fact, one time I was coming back to Houston. I landed, and I got off the airplane, and a guy walks up to me, and he goes, I know you. I know you. I know who you are. He says, Jim Baker. He said, I knew it. How's Tammy Faye? That was a man who was as tough as nails,
Yeah.
Jim Baker. See, we don't have those types anymore. We're not, that guy was an incredible guy. You know, Reagan, think about some of the great leaders, Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson. I mean, these are giants among, and they were not perfect, but they were Mike Mansfield, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some just tremendous people, and we want to see that kind of brand come back again. Bob Dole.
Or we want to figure out the way that the environment allows those imperfect but great leaders, right?
Yeah,
because
to rise.
I don't know if any of them would, like, if Ronald Reagan was running right now, I think it'd be a pretty tough
Right, would he
sledding.
have a party?
Yeah, maybe. Well, you can never discount the magnetism of people,
Yeah.
right, Steve? I mean, you can never discount it. If you ran and you really wanted to win something, you probably would do it. I'd put my money on you. I'm not giving to your campaign. All right, what else? You have any others?
Yep.
With Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and Mitt Romney no longer running for re-election, and John Tester and Sherrod Brown facing strong headwinds, who is going to broker compromise in the Senate? Why are moderates increasingly calling it quits, and is the era of bipartisanship and compromise dead?
Why are moderates increasingly calling it quits?
Yeah, probably because it's a job called the U.S. Senate that you don't actually get anything done. I say that a little bit glib. I don't know. I don't know how we get. You heard it here, first of all, because you invoked my dirt farmer from Montana that I've known since he was the first day as a state senator, that John Tester is going to win. But we need to figure out ways to reward bipartisanship and moderation. Like I always said, I was the most progressive governor ever because if the core word of progressive is progress, we actually figured out ways to get things done, right? And often it's the John Testers or at times the Joe Manchins or the Mitt Romneys that actually can get some things done because they're talking to people more than just within their own sort of bubble.
Well, I mean, Romney's been there a long time, okay? I mean, Tester's been there, what, 3 terms, 18 years? I mean, you know, the question is, you know, who comes next? And can they be people that, you know, want to be leaders? I mean, I think we've been around this here for the last hour and so many minutes. Let me just suggest to you, somebody who wants to run for public office, if any of you are thinking about it, if you got a program, if you have a vision, if you have the energy, you can win. I ran for the state senate. I don't have a single relative in the state of Ohio. I had no support, nothing from my party, nothing. I ran, I organized, I had an incredible grassroots campaign, and it was one of the biggest upsets in Ohio history. I was nothing. I just worked my tail off, and I won, and I had a vision, and I had a message. I was the only Republican to defeat an incumbent who have something in common. In 1982, the only one. I ran on the Reagan agenda. I ran on what I thought we needed to do in this country. I ran for governor. I was the first person to have never run statewide to defeat an incumbent Democrat governor in 100 years. Why? A message, an organization. Forget it. Just go out there and do it. And you can win because people are compelled to vote for people who have a message and a vision and energy and a team. Don't forget that. And anytime we forget that, it's like when we just throw the towel in. Forget it. We can get this done. And if any of you want to run, you're willing to take the heat, you go to your friends, you go to your family, you go to people that you know, you basically demand that they help you and they support you, and you can do it. Nothing has changed in this world that doesn't allow you to win. It's just when you finally win, don't forget why you ran. Sorry. How was that, Peter? Good? Okay.
Governor Bullock, do you want to have a final word in response
we're
to that? I
done?
think that's a wonderful note to end on. But I
we're
want to give
wrapping
you
up?
I know it went so fast, but I want you to give the opportunity to give a final word. That was so helpful, Governor Kasich. Thank you.
I guess I would say that, look, there are a lot of broken things right now. But I wouldn't have chosen any other path than what I did. Like, what a gift it was to get to serve as Attorney General and as governor. I took my most productive years and said, this is how I want to invest it. And it was hard at times, but still 4 years out, like at first it was funny because I complained to my wife and I'd say, like, I don't even like going out of my house because it's like your own funeral. Oh, we miss you, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, put it in perspective. They could say, you're such an ass, we're so glad you're gone. It changed the way that I interacted, but it also was the reflection of my hard days now aren't that hard. My hard days in public service were also so impactful. And don't be dispirited by the lack of civility, the seeming polarization, the outside interest. Don't be dispirited because, as the governor said, it really takes one person with a passion and values to stand up and say that I'm going to step into this. I'm going to offer my talents and skills because we can be better than where we are today. And that ought to be, no matter where we are on this chain of progression, the hope enter into it saying that I have something to contribute, and wherever we are to forming this more perfect union, we can be better tomorrow than we are today, but we can't do it if you all, first of all, don't vote, don't get engaged, and for you willing to step into this to say, I'm going to do it. It's my turn, because candidly now it is all of your turn. So thanks for coming out today, for sure.
Thank you so much.
As you can imagine, I got one last thing to say here as you leave. What's your purpose? What is your mission? Why were you put on this earth? And I don't care how old you are. It's never time to quit. Till they put you in the ground, there's no reason to quit. But there is a personal plan that's been laid out for you. You got to go find it. I mean, what are you supposed to do with your life? And I don't care if you're 8 or you're 88. What is your plan? What are you here to do? And my goal is when I die, I want at least 80% of what they say about me to be true, okay? So as you leave here, what am I supposed to do? Not what somebody else is going to do, but what can I do in whatever it is that my gifts were given to me? Because everybody here has gifts and everybody here has a purpose. Find it and do it.
Right.
Governors, on behalf of, thank you. On behalf of the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for your service. We want to thank you for encouraging us to press on. We want to thank you for your candor and your willingness to share the high points, but also the struggles of this work, because it is through your voices that we feel inspired. I look out and I see so many public service in the room. I know Congresswoman Dingell has just joined us. Hello,
where is
there she is.
Oh, I love her.
But she is here to be part of this conversation. I know there's so many other public servants in the room, and there are public servants in the making, and people dedicated to the public good, and people dedicated to our shared nation, our shared world. So thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the students who did a fantastic job assisting us, Isabella Acosta and Tiara Tresvant. Thank you to Professor Hansen for your facilitation, and thank you to my partner in progress, Jenna Bednar. Thank you, everyone. Really happy to be here with you, and we can continue this conversation out in the Betty, out in the Grand Hall. Thank you so much.